Good afternoon and welcome to Palisades and Beyond, regulatory perspectives on the potential restart of facilities and decommissioning. I'm Jason Kozel, the Division Director for the Division of Operating Reactor Safety in NRC Region 3 near Chicago, Illinois. I am also one of the co-chairs on the Palisades Restart panel. I'm excited that so many of you are in the audience, both in person and virtually, for this session. First, I'd like to introduce the team.
Mike Schulteis, Director of Regulatory and Site Strategies for Holtec at Palisades.
Adam Stein, Director of Nuclear Energy Innovation for the Breakthrough Institute.
Phil McKenna, I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Reactor Oversight in the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation, and I'm one of the Palisades Restart Panel co-chairs.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Pelton. I'm the Acting Director of the Division of Operating Reactor Licensing in NRR. I'm also one of the Palisades Restart Panel co-chairs.
And good afternoon. My name is April Wynn. I'm the lead for the Restart team in Region 3, which is just outside of Chicago. And my group is responsible for doing the inspection activities related to the Restart projects.
Thank you, everyone. Before my opening remarks, I want to address some logistical items for the session. The session will comprise of a panel presentation covering a wide range of topics related to the restart of nuclear facilities and decommissioning, followed by a question and answer session. The Q&A portion of this session will be through electronic means for both virtual and in-person attendees. For those of you joining virtually, once you have logged on, join the session, there's a tab for the Q&A box where you will input your question. And I've learned from my own experience that the email to confirm for two-factor authentication may go to your junk, so please check your junk box for that. For those of you in the room, you may have scanned this QR code up on the screen, or that was on the screen. Can you put the QR code up, please? For this session from the displays in the room. If you haven't done it yet, please go ahead, take a moment to do it. The QR code will drop you to a specific page to register and log in. Questions from both online and virtually in the room will be added to the same queue that I have out in front of me, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can before the end of the session. So the restart of reactors from the decommissioning status in the United States is a first of a kind anywhere in the world and presents unique challenges and the opportunities for the industry, the public, and the regulatory body. To meet this challenge, NRC leadership created a restart panel made up of senior managers across the agency to properly resolve any licensing, inspection, or regulatory challenges that concern the restarts of the Palisades plant. When the panel initially formed, we quickly were able to determine three things. One, there was a wide range of issues that needed to be addressed. Two, we were relatively certain that it could happen within the current regulatory framework and no new regulations were needed. And three, there was no way we were going to be able to accomplish that by ourselves. We quickly identified that we needed environmental experts to address environmental assessment issues, security and emergency preparedness experts to advise on those items, our communication experts to help us with ensuring that our communications to the public and the media were concise and accurate, our intergovernmental liaisons to coordinate communications and outreach with all levels of the government, attorneys to give us legal advice, and finally, the wide range of technical experts across the agency that would perform licensing reviews and inspection activities. This wide range of experts all play a key role in ensuring that Palisades and the projects that follow are safely restarted while providing regulatory certainty and predictability. So without further ado, we have a pretty extensive slideshow, and we'll go ahead and get started. We did that agenda. All right. So what does restart mean? Well, first of a kind activity, sorry. So Palisades is the first plant decommissioning that had requested authorization to restart. Subsequent to that, both 3 Mile Island, formerly 3 Mile Island, now the Crane Clean Energy Center from Constellation, and Duane Arnold in Iowa have both began the process of applying for a potential restart from decommissioning. So Palisades was shut down in May of 2022 and then June of 2022, and in June of 2022, transitioned fully to decommissioning. So this plant is a combustion engineering PWR, and it's located in Covert, Michigan, for those, the southwest part of Michigan. So it's a relatively, I would say, mid-sized plant at 65 megawatts thermal output, and it was originally licensed in 1971 and has since been relicensed. So it is a vintage of plant that is a little older than even most of the plants out there. But that really doesn't affect the restart piece. Next slide, please. So what does restart mean? So Palisades, when they went to decommissioning, certified that it permanently ceased power operations and fuel was permanently removed from the reactor vessel under 10 CFR 5082. So one piece of important information here is that 10 CFR Part 50 license that has not been terminated at Palisades. It was only amended to put the plant into the decommissioning state. So they still have a current Part 50 operator licensing. So to restart the plant, Holtec would need to gain NRC approval to restore the license basis to an operational status, reestablish the certification and the pedigree of the components needed to use for safe operation, and ensure that those components meet the requirements of their operational licensing basis. Next slide, please. So at the point, we turn over to Mike Schulteis from Holtec to discuss the decision to restart a reactor in decommissioning.
Great. First and foremost, thank you, Jason, as session chair, and the NRC for giving us the opportunity to talk about the project and the topic. So let's jump 2 slides in, if we could. There we go. Early on in the project, or the consideration of the project, the considerations kind of fell into 3 different bins. One, was there a licensing path to do it? Could the plant itself get there? And then overall, could a project be undertaken to get us to restart the plant once we enter decommissioning? It's tough to remember for us, but we've been at it for about 2.5 years today. And there's been a whole lot of work between then and now. And when it came to the regulatory or licensing path, one of the foundational elements for us was that we needed to do it within existing rules. We didn't see a path where we could come up with a unique ask of the NRC to give permission to undertake a project like this. And so all of our regulatory framework was built around that. We did have many items deferred for the plant proper as we were leading into decommissioning. If you remember, back in 2017 and 2018 is when it was announced that Palisades would ultimately end up in decommissioning in May of 2022. And so we had to figure out from a project standpoint and a licensing standpoint how to recover the projects that were deferred and then incorporated them into the project plan. For the technical considerations, it's good to get to hear myself. One of the key elements was that the project couldn't be done just for 6 years of operation. So one of the key elements in the project is to support long-term operation of the plant. And so subsequent license renewal application was a part of the project plan, and we needed to keep that in mind because we're pursuing 30 years of operation instead of just 6 to the end of the current license. And then project viability, we first needed to gain confidence in ourselves that we could execute a project of this magnitude, but then engage a lot of external stakeholders and get them on board with the confidence to get there. It's tough to recruit and hire staff when you're talking about an idea. And so the project plan itself came about really fast and very detailed so that we could get to the point of hiring staff to execute the project. With that, turn it over to Adam.
Thank you, Mike. Next slide, please. So before I begin, I want to give a little bit of context for why I'm on this panel. I work for the Breakthrough Institute. For those of you that do not know the Breakthrough Institute, we are a nonpartisan research center that considers technological solutions to societal environmental problems. We have been engaged in the Palisades decommissioning and restart since before the decommissioning was finalized. We participate in every NRC meeting. We comment on every NRC docket related to this matter, so we're very involved. We also work with a lot of local organizations and just members of the public near the plant, so we understand their perspectives as well. So from a societal standpoint, why would you want to restart a reactor? Well, for a lot of reasons, really. It improves public benefits, and as the NRC mission recently changed, as directed by the ADVANCE Act, the NRC needs to consider benefits to the public in decision-making. It increases the availability of clean energy, which was also discussed at length by several commissioners this morning in plenary talks. We need more clean energy, more energy in general. Returning an existing plant that is safe to operate back to service provides a lot of energy very quickly compared to building something new. It reduces environmental impact compared to running alternative energy sources, particularly fossil fuels. Palisades was replaced in generation by a gas plant that is next door. When it was retired, that increases the impact to the environment versus when Palisades was in operation. And it reduces overall public health impact for the same reason. Burning fossil fuels impacts directly the health of the public nearby the plant. For context of how much that impacts the local area, you can see my graph here. Restarting Palisades is the equivalent to almost replacing or doubling the generation of all of the wind in Michigan just by restarting one reactor. 5 times the amount of generation from all of Michigan's solar or hydropower. That adds a considerable amount relative to the rest of the clean energy generation in Michigan right now. But appropriate regulatory oversight should provide reasonable assurance of adequate protection to the public when considering this. It has to be done appropriately and safely for both the environment and the public, but we think that it is an important measure to move forward. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Phil.
Thank you, Adam. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides will discuss how we started the process with the senior leaders and staff at the NRC for the Palisades Restart Project. When the discussion began about a Palisades potential restart, there was much discussion about how the agency would go about this effort. The staff conducted research on other major projects that were similar in nature, multi-year shutdowns that had happened in the past, the restart of construction like Watts Bar 2, and the recently completed Vogtle 3 and 4 construction effort. We consulted the petition for rulemaking that informed the staff that we had an existing regulatory framework in place to conduct licensing and oversight of a plant that is currently in a decommissioning status. In all major NRC projects that have started up from an extended shutdown, the agency had assembled a restart panel of experienced NRC leaders to oversee the effort. The Palisades Restart Panel was chartered, and we were off to oversee the Palisades project. Next slide, please. As stated in the last slide, a charter was written and approved by the NRR director and the Region 3 administrator for the Palisades Restart Panel. We have introduced ourselves as the co-chairs of that panel. The panel guides the staff efforts to review Holtec's licensing and regulatory requests and inspect the facility to ensure it is safe to operate. The primary objective of the panel is to proactively identify and promptly resolve any licensing, inspection, or regulatory challenges that concern the Palisades Restart effort. Next slide, please. And one of the first actions we did as a panel is we did a regulatory retreat in Region 3 to get all the experts together from the NRR technical divisions, security, emergency planning, licensing, inspection and oversight to kind of scope out what we needed to consider in the restart effort. I'll now turn it over to Jamie Pelton.
For the next few minutes, I'd like to talk about the NRC process for creating our regulatory roadmap. Next slide, please. As Phil mentioned, one of the early focus areas of the Palisades Restart panel and our team was to determine the correct regulatory path to return a plant from decommissioning status to an operational state. At a high level, the NRC strategy for ensuring that this happens safely includes the licensing and technical reviews, our overall program oversight, and inspection activities of the day-to-day work happening at the plant. This strategy is reflected in the makeup of the Palisades Restart panel and the team of experts involved in every phase of this project. Ultimately, this combination of licensing, technical review, and oversight will help the NRC evaluate the plant's readiness to restart once Holtec provides assurance that the plant is ready to operate. Next slide, please. When it comes to licensing, it's important to note that Palisades still holds a license under 10 CFR Part 50. A series of licensing actions and certifications moved the plant from an operational status in 2022 to a decommissioning one. The regulatory strategy for licensing is to effectively reverse those actions and certifications that brought the plant into decommissioning through the NRC's existing processes to restore the operational licensing basis. These existing processes, as directed by the Commission in their decision on the petition for rulemaking that Phil mentioned, are the license amendment and exemption process. Holtec has submitted a series of licensing actions to proposing the return of the plant's licensing basis to effectively what it was just before shutdown in 2022. I'll talk about these in more detail on the next slide. Next slide, please. Holtec has submitted multiple requests to the NRC to restore the Palisades Part 50 license to revise and update the current decommissioning design and licensing basis documents to support power operations. First is the exemption request from 10 CFR 5082A2 requirements. 5082 outlines the regulations for license termination, and this exemption would remove the prohibitions against operation which went into place when the certifications for permanent cessation of operations and permanent removal of fuel were docketed. There was also a submittal to revise the operating license and permanently defuel tech specs, or technical specifications, to reflect the resumption of power operations. This also includes reinstating the security plan to the revision that existed prior to shutdown. In addition, the submittal states the most recent revision of the UFSAR will go back into effect with only administrative changes. This will be more fully updated after resumption of power operations. There was also a submittal to revise the site emergency plan to support resumption of power operations, which includes updates to more recent guidance. The staff are also evaluating a license transfer request to transfer the operating authority for Palisades from Holtec Decommissioning to Palisades Energy LLC. Staff are reviewing the operations qualifications of the organization through this request. The staff are also evaluating the operating quality assurance plan, which I'll talk more about in a minute, as part of the suite of actions to support the restart of Palisades. Staff will be focusing the reviews on areas where there are changes from the operational licensing basis as it existed in 2022. The NRC plan is to issue all licensing actions on the same day prior to the licensee's transition date, contingent on the approval of the exemption from 10 CFR 5082. All of these actions that I've mentioned have been accepted for detailed technical review, and the reviews are underway. Next slide, please. An early point of focus in discussions with Holtec was the importance of applying the correct quality assurance to the activities being conducted for restart. As a plant in decommissioning status, Palisades is required to have a decommissioning quality assurance plan. It was recognized early by the NRC staff and discussed in multiple public meetings with Holtec that the decommissioning quality assurance plan would not cover all of the safety-related work that would be undertaken to support the restart of the plant. To cover the restart work, the existing decommissioning plan was upgraded to address activities conducted during the transition to potential restart. This is known as the Transitional Quality Assurance Plan. Holtec also submitted the Operational Quality Assurance Program Manual for review and approval as a supplement to the license transfer request. This process resulted from proactive early public engagement between the NRC and Holtec. Recently, the NRC staff completed and published the draft environmental assessment to assess environmental impacts of the potential restart and to meet the National Environmental Policy Act obligations. The results of this EA and publication of the final EA will inform the outcome and schedule for the NRC licensing reviews. With that, I'll turn it over to Mike Schultheis to provide Holtec's perspectives.
Thanks, Jamie. Like I had mentioned, when we were developing our regulatory roadmap, there wasn't a precedent already set for us to follow. We quickly came to the conclusion that we needed to develop an exemption request to 5082 Alpha 2 itself, which is effectively the permanency of shutdown once you're entering into decommissioning. We used a lot of help to validate that. If I could see through the lights, there's probably at least 6 people in here that got a late night text from myself or our team to try and poke holes. What are we missing in our proposed solution? On top of that, Jamie had mentioned the license transfer application that was submitted. What was unique for Holtec is that Holtec is the operator of a decommissioning operating license, but was not evaluated as an operator for an operating plant when they took possession of the license. So we needed to address the mechanism for the NRC to review the operating authority of the plant. And lo and behold, the license transfer application is the method, but somewhat unique to us is that it's a transfer of operational authority from Holtec to a different Holtec entity. Next slide.
1 second. We're going to continue on because we have limited time, but I know our AV crew is trying to get the slides back up, so they're online if you have them, but we'll just keep moving.
Thanks. We got a TV. We can turn
We
the
can see
TV
it.
around. I see it okay.
That's right.
So we entered into a lot of open public meetings with the NRC, primarily early on to flush out questions and challenges. Like I had mentioned, it was foundational for us to stay within the existing framework of the NRC. And I think it ties to Chairman Wright and Senator Capito's comments this morning about what's the private sector's responsibility when it comes to licensing. And we felt it our responsibility to somewhat lead the effort and the NRC down the path that we were forging. A lot of submittals since then. It's been 2 years since we discussed the framework with the NRC. Even on that topic alone, we had internal dialogue about, are we asking the NRC permission at that point to allow us to go down this path, or are we just presenting somewhat a project plan and more to come later? Next slide. Oh, sorry, yeah, next slide for me. So that's gonna be awkward. That'll be awkward for you more than it is for me. We identified one of the early on needs was to identify the critical path string for the project. And very quickly, we identified the operator licensing string from a training standpoint was that long path. And so at the end of 2023, we started to restore the simulator that kind of got piecemealed out early on in decommissioning to restore it, restore the data files so that it could be used for operator training. And in January of 2024, we formally restored license operator training at Palisades. Very fortunate for us at Palisades is that we had 26 previous license operators willing to enter into recall training and get their license back. And we had at least 3 retired shift managers come on board to perform training for our licensed operators. So unique for us is we had a whole lot of experience that came back to help us restore the operator training program and develop the plan to get the highest proficiency level out of our operators that was possible. We're still pursuing transitioning to our Power Ops licensing basis in August of this year and formally starting up the plant in fourth quarter of this year. Got a really cool graphic on the next slide that you guys can read about next week. With that, Adam, back to you.
You get a quarter of it.
Next slide, Mike.
Yeah, next slide. And then,
There we go.
there we go, that's a part of it. It's like you didn't do your update on Apple Maps.
All right, next slide, or a quarter of it. So exemptions were required. That's already been discussed. One key component of an exemption is it must not present undue risk to the public health and safety. It's important to mention that because that, in our view, is not mentioned enough in public meetings, that this is considered very early on in this process, that to even approach the exemption that has to come before many of the other steps getting to restart, the NRC is already considering whether this will present undue risk to the public. Once again, I'm communicating that because that's not communicated, in our view, enough to the public for that assurance to them that this is, from the start, part of considerations. That follows with my next point, which you almost can see. Engagement with the public must provide sufficient transparency to result in public confidence. Members of the public, some of them assumed that this plant would be retired forever, and some of them felt more comfortable because of that. And now that it's being returned, they need to understand the process that it is going through for requalification to ensure that it is going to be operated safely again. The regulatory process should be as parallel as possible to enable efficiency. That's normally done through normal licensing. Environmental reviews are done parallel to safety reviews, for example, but there's other requalification and inspections for an as-built plant that are being done, that needs to be done in parallel as much as possible to use resources as efficiently as possible for both the NRC and for the applicant. And because there are other plants that are expected to follow this process, prompt application of lessons learned will be important. For the Crane Energy Center and Duane Arnold, if they do actually apply, we want these lessons learned to be in place for them to, once again, be more efficient for the NRC and be more transparent for the public. That being said, uncertainty related to the level of inspection required has always been a question from day one. How much is going to need to be fully examined for the NRC to feel confident that the plant is safe to return to service? It's not as if it just went down for a refueling outage, nothing was touched, and it's coming back online. It was offline for a period. Some things have changed. For instance, the simulator, as Mike mentioned, was parted out. Things do need to be restored, but do we need to inspect literally every centimeter of the plant? Or do we need to expect to the level that creates certainty or confidence in a regulatory decision-making? And I would say it's the latter. And we should consider the existing license, because it's been mentioned several times that the license is still in force. It's just been transitioned to a different status. And leverage past reviews, such as the supplemental environmental impact statement, to the extent possible. The NRC did that with the supplemental environmental impact statement when they did the environmental assessment, which was recently published to the Federal Register and the comment period recently closed. That is a case where the NRC was more efficient by taking advantage of information and their own analysis that they had already done. And now, to Phil.
Next slide, please. Here we go. Of utmost importance in the Palisades potential restart was ensuring safety and that the plant would meet all of its safety requirements at the point it was ready to restart. The next few slides will talk about how we're ensuring safety in the restart process. Next slide, please. So for the members of the audience who are not familiar with our inspection and oversight process, all our inspection manual chapters and all our inspection procedures are public information on the NRC public website. So we had inspection manual chapters in the past for different long-term projects that we needed to develop some specific guidance for. In particular, there's a manual chapter for long-term shutdown of a plant that's not having performance issues, and there is one for a long-term shutdown of a plant that has performance issues. So we knew we needed to develop guidance for the Palisades restart, potential restart. So we drew from these past inspection manual chapters to develop manual chapter 2562, which is generic to any plant that is undergoing a restart from a decommissioning status. So we looked ahead and thought Palisades may not be the only site that does this in the U.S., and we were fortuitous that we had the guidance in place now for any potential restarts. We've revised the manual chapter twice so far just to incorporate some lessons learned from the Palisades restart effort in itself. The manual chapter describes the restart panel, the transition between oversight processes, and the development of an inspection plan. In the manual chapter, it also discusses how the director of NRR and the applicable regional administrator will agree on when to transition oversight to the reactor oversight process after considering the restarts panel recommendation based on the inspection and results of assessment during the restart process. And I will now turn the presentation over to Adam again.
Next slide, please. So from a public perspective, ensuring safety is a critical component of the process. That should be as far as we need to say it, but the public does not, near the plant, always understand this. They need to be communicated more directly about what the safety level is and what the process is. Once again, we're returning to the operating licensing basis. The license is still in place. The plant operated safely previously to being shut down. Something that is not said enough in public meetings is that this plant was not shut down due to safety concerns. There were not concerns. It was operating as the NRC would deem to be safe. I think that it's important that the NRC tells the public that specifically and clearly. The current status is it's defueled. It's very low safety risk. Very, very low safety risk. There is some fuel sitting in a spent fuel pool or in casks. That is the extent of the safety risk. The public also needs to understand that that risk will not substantially increase until after all of the reviews are completed and it starts to move into operational testing. So after the NRC has determined that it's confident that the plant can return to operation safely, that's the point where it would be refueled. That does not come up sufficiently, in our view, in meetings to convey to the public that the plant is currently safe and will remain safe. The transition to operational status should not increase risk substantially, period. It says until testing, and that's true, that's factual. But when it returns operational status, it will not increase risk to the public substantially at all, because plants that are operating according to the regulations do operate safely. There's uncertainty that increases roughly proportional to the point in the decommissioning process. By this I mean uncertainty in terms of what might be needed to be evaluated to return to operational status if a plant has been decommissioned for 2 decades. It is very unclear what the NRC might want to know before you would return to operational status. But there's also uncertainty in terms of what, for the applicant, might need to be updated, both in technology and in operational programs to more modern guidance before returning to operational status as well. So there's uncertainty on both sides. Holtec has decided to lead the charge, as it were, in taking on how do we return a plant from decommissioning to operational status. The NRC, in our view, has also been a good partner in this discussion. In this instance, both teams are working together and making sure that the progress moves forward reasonably and while maintaining safety of the public. And now to Mike.
Thanks, Adam. An important element of our project or undertaking was to be able to do as much as possible in parallel. And so what we couldn't do is wait for all of the licensing work to be done before we start physical projects in the plant itself. And so what we did was, Jamie had mentioned it with the Transitional Quality Assurance Plan, is that we implemented operational quality controls well ahead of when they would be required to be implemented, which is with our Power Ops tech specs anticipated in August. And what this allowed us to do was to go out and do field work and engineering changes that would hold up to an operational pedigree ahead of when that pedigree needs to be proven. I think it's fair to say for Holtec is that we weren't sure what to expect on the inspection part of this endeavor. The IMC 2562 we believe puts a very strong risk-informed inspection plan together, and that's how we see it playing out with our on-site resident inspectors and the teams from both the region and DC during inspections. April.
All right, thanks, Mike. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, early in the restart process, it was determined that continuous communications of the on-site activities between the regional office, specifically my group, and Holtec was critical for the NRC to ensure that the potential restart of the reactor was being done safely. This included attending licensee daily meetings and project status meetings and reviewing work activity schedules. Through these reviews and communications, the regional inspection team has been able to follow in-field activities real time to support the NRC's assessment of the plant's readiness for restart and operation. The inspection team created a publicly available inspection plan that encompassed activities selected based on risk-informed decision-making and using the plant's operating history to inform areas of interest. The inspectors will review activities using the proposed design and licensing bases, the Transitional Quality Assurance Plan, which was already talked about, plus regulatory and code requirements. The NRC inspection staff is choosing areas to inspect under each of the cornerstones of safety to inform the overall operational readiness of the facility. Existing inspection procedures are being used in full or in part to accomplish most of these inspection activities, with new procedures being created as needed. Lessons learned from extended plant shutdowns, new reactor readiness, and construction inspections were also reviewed and incorporated into the inspection plan as appropriate. It is estimated that inspectors will spend approximately 6,000 to 7,000 hours conducting team and baseline type inspection activities. This plan also included restaffing the resident inspector office, which was already mentioned, which is a team of 2 inspectors who are at the site daily to follow the activities. These inspectors have been permanently on site since December of 2024. Next slide, please. The inspection team created to execute this plan included subject matter experts and experienced inspectors from across the agency. All inspection activities are being documented in inspection reports that are publicly available on our public website as the activities are being accomplished. The areas for inspection include reviewing any changes that were made to the facility for shutdown that would need to be reversed for restart, restoration of operating license conditions and bases, any significant items of interest that were either deferred or altered prior to the shutdown, open equipment issues and corrective action items that were entered prior to the shutdown, and reimplementation of administrative programs such as the corrective action program. The regional staff also continues to inspect decommissioning-related items of interest that are still in effect until the unit transitions back to an operational status. Some inspections that have already occurred include examining the 26 individuals who were mentioned previously, who used to hold operator licenses and then came back to the NRC to be relicensed, conducting radiation protection program implementation reviews for major projects such as the primary coolant system decontamination process, inspecting the material condition of the reactor vessel and steam generators as the structural integrity of those large components are evaluated to verify they meet regulatory and code requirements, and reviewing plans to return systems back to service to ensure that all of the structure, systems, and components within those systems will meet their design and licensing bases as they are proposed currently. This also includes verifying appropriate reestablishment and reimplementation of required administrative programs such as the corrective action process, like I mentioned, and things like safety culture monitoring. Finally, teams of inspectors will evaluate the plant's readiness to implement programs such as the Emergency Preparedness Plan and the Security Strategy to provide assurance that all cornerstones of safety are evaluated for readiness to restart. All of the inspectors' assessments as part of their inspection activities will be reviewed by the Restart Panel as part of their decision-making process for future recommendation to restart. Next slide, please. Another critical aspect of the Restart project is to ensure that the NRC's process is open and transparent, as many folks have already mentioned. Next slide, please. One of the most important areas identified by the team early in the Restart project process was communications. These included both internal and external communications on what the Restart team was doing, the status of the activities by Holtec, and real-time reports of any potential questions or issues that arise. The Restart Panel created a communication plan that included coordinating activities of licensing, oversight, and inspection, including any current decommissioning-related items. The communication plan utilizes agency expertise and lessons learned to ensure that the right information is being shared at the right times to everyone who has an interest in the project, from staff members all the way up to Congress. Next slide, please. The communications team also wanted to engage with external stakeholders early and often for this project to provide clear and timely status of the NRC's activities. Historically at Palisades, external stakeholders have been very engaged and interested in the operation of the facility, including previous equipment issues, site safety culture, the age of the facility, environmental impacts of the plant's shutdown and operation, and decommissioning activities as they were occurring. The Restart Panel has held government-to-government meetings with local, county, state, and tribal groups in the area. We have had interviews and tours with the media. We have held hybrid meetings on the licensing submittals and technical topics. And we have held nearly quarterly public meetings in the local community to communicate with interested individuals on the status of the Restart activities. Also, the status of the NRC's activities is available on our public website, as we mentioned, where you can find frequently updated information about the licensing activities, inspection activities, and find the inspection reports, and also find information about upcoming public meetings. Finally, there are a variety of ways to communicate with the NRC and share feedback with the Restart Panel that's also on that public website. And now I will turn it back over to Mike.
Thanks, April. So we know that in West Michigan, we have extremely strong state, county, and local support for the project and for the plant, but it was equally important for us to ensure that we didn't lose the trust and support of all of those folks. So we entered an endeavor to conduct open houses. The first one was fantastic because we got over 20 resumes dropped in our lap, and like I had mentioned before, staffing is always a challenge. We also participated in one of the quarterly public meetings that the NRC put on. somewhat to discuss the project public-facing, but to be questioned and answered by the NRC while they're in their role. And then tours and site visits, we've been doing tours at the plant ever since the fall of 2022, when we started to consider the project. And the feedback that we got early on in those tours is it looks like we're just in a long refueling outage. Though we entered decommissioning, we never started dismantling the plant proper itself. And so it looks like the plant is just kind of sitting there waiting for us to turn it back on. Adam.
Next slide, please. So, as you might imagine that I'm going to say, public engagement is critical to public acceptance. It is not the number of NRC meetings that is the challenge. The NRC and Holtec in this case, for this instance, have done a good job of reaching out to the public on many occasions. The challenge is often meaningful two-way communication. The NRC needs to respond with clear, factual responses during public interactions. The Palisades team has done a much better job at this than most NRC meetings, to be clear. They have provided clear, factual responses to some members of the public that claimed something was different than the case that it actually was, for instance. But in the broader NRC public engagement arena, we find that there is a lot of challenges. Myself and my team have attended almost 200 meetings with the NRC just last year. So we engage with the NRC a lot. And we find that there's differences with how they engage from one office to another, from one project manager to another. There's hesitancy to respond to the public with direct answers, such as we monitor plants, we provide oversight to ensure they operate safely, something as simple as that. The role of the NRC, some NRC project managers or staff members are afraid to say in a public meeting, and that reduces confidence significantly. We published the report that's on the screen that outlines a lot of these clear things that the NRC can do because a project manager sits in their meetings and they understand how that public meeting went. Commissioners don't often participate in public meetings. We attend almost all of them, so we can see across all of these meetings what the differences are, where the best practices can be, and we strongly encourage the NRC to consider how they can optimize public engagement in this way. We also encourage applicants to share as much as they're willing to in public meetings, because the public's allowed to ask the NRC staff questions. They can ask the applicant, but the applicant's not required to respond in any way. We encourage applicants to respond as much as they can so they can be partners with the community. Like Mike said, he wants to make sure that the community near the plant has confidence in the plant. That is critical for any nuclear-related facility, not just nuclear energy, but fuel, et cetera. So we strongly recommend the NRC look at how to improve the public engagement process, not by increasing the number of meetings, but by improving them. And to Jason.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, we're going to now discuss, next slide, please, sorry. Now discuss what we see as future impacts that this project will have an outcome on similar projects and maybe the industry at large. Next slide, please. We want to talk about a concept that the panel calls regulatory entrepreneurship. The regulations are there, and in a lot of cases have had very well-defined processes to navigate over the years. Those processes are good and reliable, but as we learned with this project being new, we're not necessarily applied. We're a fit one-for-one on what this project needed to take a plant from decommissioning to back to operation. So for that challenge, we approached this first and foremost in ensuring safety, security, and all the environmental safety requirements were met. As the chairman has emphasized and likes to say, safety's our North Star, right? We still work, and I say that about the regulator, I say that about the industry, and I say that about the public, right? So the panel was open from the beginning from new ways of navigating those regulations and applying them to this project. One of the biggest things I would say that we did and the licensee Holtec did was listen. We listened to each other, we heard out their plans. When they came with a novel approach, we didn't immediately say no or that doesn't fit. We had broader conversations, and when we had questions, I believe in this case, like Adam was talking about with being open and transparent, those questions were asked both directions, and folks considered those. And I think that was a real big part of getting this project off the ground and moving in the way it is. So the panel, we talked about this at the retreat. Phil talked about that from the beginning. We're open to new ways of navigating the regulations applying to the project. We got a lot of guidance from our legal experts, making sure that we were, if you will, inside the regulatory box, right? In licensing space, the focus was on changes to the plant. That in turn minimized undue regulatory burden on the licensee. In oversight space, we're focusing on areas of higher plant risk and activities that could lead to significant safety issues. Keeping this focus allowed the team to appropriately address issues and continues to ensure safety and compliance while ensuring efficient use of resources and regulatory predictability. Finally, the Palisades Restart Panel is working closely with the panels for both the Crane Clean Energy Center and Duane Arnold, which are also, that one is my region as well, by sharing lessons learned, providing continuity to membership. I think Jamie's on all three of the panels. Congratulations. Phil is on too. Updating guidance to ensure regulatory predictability and confidence for those projects. We've gotten feedback from those other projects that the work we're doing and the communications we had have led them to understand where I think the NRC's position was and how we're going forward, and it provided them the predictability and reliability for them to have the confidence to go to these next projects. Adam.
Next slide, please. So our view of future impacts is that the NRC doesn't currently have a defined pathway, as we've mentioned several times. There is significant public interest in enabling the transition from decommissioning to operational status if it's done appropriately and safely. And we think that the Palisades restart is going along this line at the moment. This is also a good point to remind you that the ADVANCE Act required the NRC to update their mission statement to not unnecessarily limit benefits to the public. By taking on this role of thinking entrepreneurially instead of just about the way that things haven't been done in the past, thinking what can be done instead, the NRC is taking an approach to not unnecessarily limit by saying, no, we can't, it's in decommissioning, and instead saying, can we do this? We applaud that effort. Additional facilities are expected to seek restart. We see no significant barriers to the approach that is being used in regulation, but a robust pathway needs to be defined and laid out, as we think they are doing right now, so it is consistently applied for other plants. We don't want every plant to be a one-off approach. And a new rulemaking to codify how to return a plant from decommissioning to operational status, we think would miss the moment. The timing that it would take to implement that rulemaking, if one was chosen to occur, would come too late for all of the plants that are currently seeking to restart. And it would reduce flexibility in the process because plants would want to wait for the finality of a rule that's implemented before applying with their license, and they would want to follow that explicitly instead of being entrepreneurial about what can be done. Back to Jason.
All right, next slide. Sorry. Okay. So thank you, Adam. That closes our presentation. If you'd like more information on the Palisades Restart Project, you can scan that QR code. This is not the Q&A QR code, but it will take you to the web page that we've set up for Palisades. It's got all the restart activity, any public documents we've had out there, any presentations we've got there. Also has decommissioning activities, inspection reports, very one-stop shop for all the things, hearing schedule, all that stuff is there. Additionally, you can reach out to us at the email address on the screen, Palisades Restart Project, all one word, at nrc.gov, with any questions or comments. We try to respond to just about everyone. So I'd like to thank all the panel members and your insights on this topic. It was very helpful, a lot of work get to this point, but I think it's a great topic that's got a lot of interest based on the questions I'm seeing. So as a reminder, use that QR code. If we could put the Q&A QR code back up, please, to submit questions. If you have more questions, we're going to try to get to as many as we can in the next, I think we have about 30 minutes left. Good job, you guys stayed on time. Almost right on time, a little early. Good. And then afterwards, the panel, we're going to be outside those doors in the atrium area if you'd like any follow-on conversation or have some more questions for us. So without further ado, we'll go transition to Q&A. First question is for Michael. So Michael, are there any technical specification or surveillance requirements changes from the version in place when the plant was shut down to decommission needed prior to restart?
The short answer is no, but it is public knowledge that we submitted a subsequent change to our technical specifications based on our steam generator inspection results. So to transition back to power ops, we will do that without the change, and then subsequently we'll incorporate that anticipated approved change, but that's for the startup itself of the plant and associated with changing modes.
Okay, thank you. Next question's for Phil. Phil, the question was, how will sufficient and competent staffs be assured? I assume that is on-site and maybe for the inspection staff.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So as I covered in a couple slides, we have established a process for oversight and inspection that is in Manual Chapter 2562. There has been inspection at the site as the licensee goes through major evolutions, and up until the point where Region 2 placed two resident inspectors at the site for the daily operations of the potential restart. And based on the inspection effort and the inspection plan that has been issued and the monthly engagements with the Palisades Restart Panel in that process, we'll evaluate that oversight and make a recommendation to the NRR director and the Regional 3 regional administrator when Palisades says they are ready to restart.
Thank you, Phil. Michael, this next one's for you again. Would you give some examples of the decommissioning actions that were already ongoing at the plant at the time you decided to restart?
Yeah, so it's been weird to be in decommissioning formally and undertake the project. So I'd mentioned we had not undertaken any dismantling of the plant proper, but traditional decommissioning activities did include a lot of hazardous material removal from the plant, which is a good thing even for the restart. We still needed to support our emergency plan for decommissioning, and then we've also been doing a fuel campaign.
Thank you. This question is for Jamie. Jamie, what's the status of the license amendment request for sleeving the steam generators? Maybe just give a little high-level overview of what's going on with the steam generators.
Sure. So as Mike mentioned, they've submitted a request to amend their technical specifications to allow a methodology for sleeving the steam generator tubes. We are currently in the acceptance review process, and we are wrapping that up now. So once we complete that process, then the technical review will begin. Thank
you, Jamie. This is another one for you, Jamie. What's the current estimate date of issuance of the NRC approvals for Palisades for restart of the plant?
Currently, based on the review schedule we have that's on our public website, we are on track to issue the bundle of licensing actions to support restart by, if assuming the safety reviews are completed adequately and it's determined to be safe, those reviews will be completed this summer.
Okay, great. This question is for April. I'm trying to mix it up here a little bit. And Mike might have to help a little bit with this. Michael might have to. Of the 26 former operators undergoing recall or have gone recall, how many were SROs versus ROs, reactor operators versus senior reactor operators, sorry. Does the former operators number include any auxiliary system operators, or is that, field operators versus control room staff? If you could cover that as well. Could you cover the conditions while they were allowed to recertify versus have to go over certification again, please, as well?
Yeah, so I'll go through the process, and Mike, you can correct me on the numbers part of it, but essentially with the timeline that was presented that you all saw here today, right, Palisades came in with, Holtec being the new owner-operator group, and asked the NRC to start looking at this project within 2 years of when they permanently shut down in 2022. That 2 years is a key number there. So individuals who previously held operator licenses from the NRC, whether they were senior reactor operators or reactor operators, per regulation, you can reapply to get your license back and not have to go through the entire initial licensing training program if you do it within 2 years of when you gave up your license. So in the case of the individuals that were still on site who were doing decommissioning related activities, so for example, individuals who were fuel handlers, those individuals then came back to the NRC within that 2-year time frame and took an exam that was administered by our operator licensing examiners. This included work on the simulator, it included in-plant field activities, and also a written exam. And if those individuals passed that exam, then they were able to get their licenses back within this shorter time frame. Again, the key number there was the 2-year time frame. So for some of the future projects, this might not necessarily apply. But I believe the numbers were around 16 SROs and 8 ROs, but I could have that wrong. But they were all individuals who previously held licenses from the NRC, so they were not the in-field operators or the auxiliary operators. Those individuals go through a separate training program. They don't have licenses from the NRC. We call them non-licensed operators. However, they still have to go through a very rigorous in-field, on-the-job kind of activity where they're being tested and examined in a similar way to the licensed operators.
Thank you, April. Phil, where and when will restart lessons learned be shared for industry stakeholders' use?
So as we go on with the Palisades Restart project, we are assembling our lessons learned internally right now. It's a very good question so typically at the end of a major project, we will publish those lessons learned, but in this case, that may not be timely enough. So we'll consider publishing some interim lessons learned on our public website. Great question. Go ahead, Jane.
You go ahead.
If I could just add to what Phil said, we were chartered to provide lessons learned at the end of this process. However, we have had public pre-application engagement with Constellation for 3 Mile Island Unit 1, which is to be renamed the Crane Clean Energy Center. We are preparing to have engagement with NextEra. Next Wednesday is our the regulatory path public meeting with NextEra, and we do lean forward in communications, publicly sharing with those entities what we've learned through going through the Palisades licensing process.
And internally, the panels at least meet once a month together to share, and there, like I talked about in my slides, there is continuity through the different panels to share those lessons learned internally, but we'll take that for action, Phil. Thanks. Okay, this is for Michael. State government support of power plant projects is often the make or break point in continued nuclear power plant operation. What specific state of Michigan support items have been crucial to moving the Palisades Restart program forward?
So it's a good question. For us, if you don't remember, the state asked us to do it. So I think that was kind of like they played their hand already.
Can you be more specific what kind of support the state provided the project?
There was financial support, if that's what we're trying to get at. There's a state of Michigan grant that was provided for the project itself.
Yep, that's good. Thanks. This question is for Jamie. What are the most commonly asked questions by the public in the communication process?
The most commonly asked questions by the public during our engagement process?
That's correct.
The most common question is, how do we know that what is being done safely? So I would say by far that's our most common question. How do we know what you're doing is safe? And we explain through the combination of our licensing and technical reviews. We have technical experts, legal experts from across the agency that provide that assurance as the reviews are ongoing that what's being proposed is safe, and we won't approve it if it is not safe. And we try to be as transparent as we can with the process that we're using.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this one is for Adam. Adam, has the Breakthrough Institute advocated a concentrated campaign using social media to try and get the message of safety for this project to the public? Have you considered looking at social media influencers to increase the breadth of who receives this message?
So we do use social media to convey our message. We also post all of our reports, such as the one I cited on public engagement, on our website. It's not all direct NRC engagement, for example. However, particular to restarting Palisades, we've engaged a lot with the local public around the plant because that is the public that is directly impacted by this action. So while it is important for the broader public to know and to understand and support this effort, it is more important for the public that lives near the plant to understand and accept this effort. And sometimes if you get too much engagement from around a broader area, then the public that is near the plant can feel like they're being bullied into a decision that isn't their own, even if they initially were supportive of restarting the plant, for example. If all of a sudden there are people from California and Florida and Maine jumping into NRC proceedings and saying, we support this, you need to do this, then the local population feels like they're being pushed into it against their will. And that's something we want to avoid.
Thank you, Adam. This question is for Michael, but I think April can provide our perspective on it as well. Because the plant was initially licensed in 1971, how has Holtec considered aging management in the restart of the plant and additional subsequent license renewal to operate the facility beyond 2031?
It's good. So I can't go technical on this at all, but it's been a strong consideration. So like I had mentioned before, we're currently developing our application for the subsequent period or subsequent license renewal. So all of the aging management evaluations are underway. Part of that decision to do the application now is to inform the project, so that if we were able to evaluate some material condition in the plant that needs to be addressed now, we have the opportunity to do it while we're in a long outage.
And April, can you talk about what we look at with aging management and license renewal? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that relate to aging management and license renewal that we are looking at in inspection space, and there's a couple different approaches we're taking for this. So as I mentioned earlier, Holtec has put together these system return to service plans, right, where they review licensing, design basis requirements, code requirements, regulatory requirements, anything that might be administrative or programmatic related to all the different pieces and parts of the systems that are on site. So I have a team of individuals that are working with my group right now who are reviewing those plans and ensuring that all of those requirements, including anything that's related to aging management, is part of those plans, right? So it's doing inspections of underground piping, for example. It's looking at things like the reactor vessel and the steam generators. It's, refurbishing motors and other components that might have a service life attached to them. And we're ensuring that those plans make sense and then that they're actually being implemented prior to the restart. So there's two parts even to that. Another piece is that we at the NRC have an inspection procedure that specifically looks at things related to license renewal. And so because of the age of Palisades, we've done phases of reviews of their license renewal programs and processes, including aging management. We're using that guidance that we already have, and we're applying it in this scenario to look at specific, again, components and programs and structures that we think are relevant and high risk to be reviewed prior to potential restart. So we are going to have a team of individuals who will be out at the site this calendar year looking at some of those and doing those very specific inspections as well.
Thank you. This question is for Adam. Adam, could you talk more about what a potential rulemaking would miss about the restart process for interested or eligible reactors?
Well, first would be timing, because a rulemaking process generally takes at least 3 years for a full rulemaking. And by then, we would expect even Duane Arnold to have begun the process or been well along the process of pre-application, if not already submitted their license. So it'll come too late. And then it'll be a wasted resource for the NRC staff to go through a rulemaking process that might not ever have somebody to use it again. Most of the other plants that have gone into decommissioning are well into the process with significant material changes to the plant that would be difficult or at least very expensive to return to service. In terms of what it could miss on flexibility, if the rulemaking becomes very strict, these specific exemptions would be considered in return to decommissioning, and a plant needs a different exemption for their particular case that's not in the rule, that either becomes overly limiting or you need an additional exemption that's outside of what the rulemaking is. The NRC needs to consider that and justify that separately anyway. Because all of the plants that are in decommissioning status are at various points along the decommissioning process, not a single one of them has the exact same path back to operation. So flexibility is more important in this case than a strict rule. It would also not provide more regulatory certainty in this case, because exemptions provide regulatory certainty once they're granted.
I'm going to take the next question. I want to talk a little bit more. Was there much negative reaction or concerns raised about safety? Any local political pushback? So I'll go back to the slide April had about external stakeholders and engagement. Just like any other project that's new and hasn't been done before, there was a lot of public and media interest in that project. Continues to be. There is a large active public population around Palisades. They're very interested in their community. They do come out quite a bit and engage with us. We committed early in the project to those folks that the panel would be out there on a quarterly basis. Around that, nobody wants to be in Southwest Michigan in February, but they've been understanding. Yeah, and so we've engaged on them, and one of the big pieces that we've done as part of that is listen to the questions. If we don't have answers to those questions, we either bring the answers back to those individuals, we bring it back to the next meeting, or even we've brought experts with us to the panels the next time around to continue that public engagement. We do, we try to stick really heavily to the facts of whatever the matter is and continue that engagement. We plan on continuing that throughout the lifetime of the project. It does take a lot of time and effort, but I do believe, ultimately, even if folks don't agree with the decisions, they'll understand how we got to those decisions and appreciate us taking the time to engage those stakeholders. As far as the local political climate there is very supportive of the plant. However, just like everything else, we focused on outreach. We did what we call government-to-government meetings with local, state, tribal officials. Continue to do those meetings, make sure their concerns are addressed, any questions they have answered, and that will continue on for the lifetime of the project. So it's been a big focus of the panel and actually one of the things that we were chartered to do. Next question is for Michael. During the period where the plant was in decommissioning status, was the emergency diesel generator kept operational or was it shut down after fuel was removed from the spent fuel pool? And I don't believe there's fuel fully removed from the spent fuel pool, so go ahead.
Yeah, so to be clear, when we entered into decommissioning formally, tech specs did not require our emergency diesel generators to be operable. We did elect to continue PM strategies and surveillances with a lowercase s on the diesels at a different periodicity than they would be done under our operating tech specs. What we did find is even when we drew out those surveillances, I can't remember if it was to 3 or 6 months, is that all of the operating pedigrees for the diesels were still met, even at a different periodicity. Once again, when we transition back to the operating tech specs, surveillances will be done as required to prove operability.
Thank you. Next question is for Phil. How will construction activities be affected by the presence of multiple QA programs? And can you talk about how this isn't a construction activity? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. So as Jason talked about, so Palisades still has their Part 50 license. It transitioned into a decommissioning status, so they are not in a construction status for oversight. They're in right now, the status for oversight is somewhat decommissioning and as part of the restart effort. The plant will eventually transition back into the reactor oversight process. And Jason, I forgot the second part of the question. And maybe you have to.
How will having multiple QA plans affect
yes,
those
QA
activities?
plans.
Thank
Yes.
you.
So one of the first engagements we had with Holtec was to talk about their QA plan. Since they were in a decommissioning status, they were using a decommissioning quality assurance plan. We wanted to be clear that any activities that were going to be done as part of the restart effort had to meet operational QA requirements, had to meet Appendix B of Chapter 50 of 10 CFR 50. Palisades has submitted their operational QA plan, as Jamie discussed, as part of the bundle, and they have supplemented their decommissioning plan to be a transitional QA plan such that it covers all the activities it needs to cover as part of the restart.
Thank you. Next question is for Michael again. Were any opportunities assessed and pursued for plant upgrades or retrofits to enhance plant modernization?
Yeah, we had a good list of upgrade opportunities. Some of those are in the works right now. Some of them were not feasible for the project period and will be considered at later outages. I think sometimes this question comes around to power uprate also, which was that there was no opportunities to pursue power uprate for the project.
Okay, thanks. Jamie, this question is for you. What was required in the environmental assessment process considering it was a previously operating nuclear plant?
Yeah, so our team of environmental review experts from our rulemaking, environmental, and financial support, I think I have the acronym right, and NMSS, did an evaluation to determine what level of environmental review would be necessary under NEPA. So through their review, they determined that the environmental assessment would be the appropriate level of a footprint to put on the environmental review for this project. And I encourage folks to look at the draft EA that was published on January 31st.
Thank you. A lot of these questions are for you, Michael, just to let you know. What, if you could talk shortly about what drives the decision to recommission? And specifically, an individual asks, was it driven by data center demand or other demands?
Yeah, so for us, it primarily came down to we were approached by the governor's office in Michigan and the Secretary of Energy to consider it for green energy needs. And that really is what drove us to consider the undertaking and to develop the project plan to make it happen. Was that the whole question?
Yeah, it's over. All right. All right. Good. So this one might take a couple of folks. I can kind of cover at least my area of responsibility for it. It's a pretty broad question. Can anyone on the panel speak and describe the economic costs of the restart? So at least from our perspective, that's the cost of licensing and oversight activities. As folks may know, we have resources that we would commit to inspection activities and licensing. From the inspection side, we estimated, based on the initial project plan, about 7,000 person hours for our folks to do their oversight work. That's before any, contingencies or anything along those lines. So from a perspective of the NRC, at least from the oversight piece, that's approximately what we're looking at, plus any overhead from the management activities. Jamie, you want to cover licensing, if you could?
Sure, and I don't have the exact numbers at the top of my head, but if you go to the public website, we publish our resource estimates in each one of our acceptance review letters for each of the licensing actions for Palisades. Each portion of the review process is on the public website, including the acceptance review letters, so we could go there to evaluate the number of hours per review. But I don't have that offhand.
Mike, you want to answer any of that? Or? You good?
Takes us a lot more than that.
Okay, that's fair. We have quite time for probably two more questions. There's about 6 minutes left according to the big clock in front of me. So this one is for, I think April can cover it pretty well. In between the time that the plant entered decommissioning and the time it was decided to restart, how were plant design changes in the plant monitored and controlled in relation to the design basis analysis of record? Are the changes made to the plant since decommissioning began well understood such that the evaluation can be done now that restart is the goal?
Okay. So
It might be an opportunity to talk about the restart, the system restoration plans.
yeah, so when the plant shuts down, there's a series of procedures and processes that any plant will go through as part of that activity, and that's including documenting what the status of certain systems components are at that period in time. So there is a documentation trail, there's paperwork there that says, okay, this valve was placed in this position, or in the case of going into a decommissioning state, if a modification was made to a system, maybe you don't need the same level of protection that you would for an operating unit. That modification is documented. You have to use a work order, work package, a procedure, something that does that activity. And then those records have been maintained in a database of all that information. So what my inspectors have been doing is they've been going and looking through that information as part of items that are captured in the system return to service plans like I was describing earlier. And we're verifying that all of those things are captured to put everything back into its operational state, right? So there is a large schedule that the plant puts together of all of the maintenance and testing activities, and through our reviews of those system return to service plans, we're verifying that all of those required changes to put everything back into that operational state is included in that schedule, and those things are being determined, at the right periods of time to make sure that everything will be able to perform as it's supposed to for operations.
Thank you. Last question, we have 4 minutes. I can answer it. What are the conditions or financial needs to support the restart of other projects such as Duane Arnold, for example? So Duane Arnold and Crane Clean Energy Center are the 2 projects before the commission. Can't talk about financials, that's the company's business, how they do the funding of the project. But what I can tell you is those projects, compared to Palisades and each other, have as much as they are the same, they're different. One of the bigger things, at least I can compare, at least what I know about Duane Arnold with Palisades, that they're both under my division, is the timeline. The Palisades restart project really was about an 18-month sprint, if you will, from when really got hot and heavy into licensing to when they currently plan to start the plan up. You're talking years now for Crane and Duane Arnold. I believe 28 has been what's put out there. So that does give a little bit more of a opportunity to plan and time out your resources a little better for everybody. However, those projects, since they were shut down longer, have more to do, right? So there's bigger types of projects, like for instance at Duane Arnold, they have to build cooling towers. They don't have any because of the derecho damaged them to the point where they knocked them down. So there's differences between them, but I say ultimately, if you draw a line through the projects, there are a lot of similarities. So they would be resource-wise overall be similar. So with that, there's about 2 minutes to spare. That'll conclude the panel Q&A session. Thank you very much for attending.